At 35 years old, gospel singer Jonathan McReynolds has built a legacy rooted in soul, sincerity, and spiritual strength. But just hours ago, something changed. Something major. After years of whispers, subtle lyrics, and fan speculation, the one person who has stayed silent the entire time, his mother, finally stepped forward. And what she revealed. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't PR. It was a raw, trembling truth that stunned even the most loyal fans. For years, people have asked the same questions. Why does Jonathan's music feel so personal? Why does he keep his private life locked away? And what has he really been through behind those gospel hits? Now we finally have an answer. And it doesn't come from tabloids, blogs, or interviews. It comes from the woman who's been with him from day one. Her confession doesn't just peel back the curtain, it rips it open. And what's behind it? Pain. Pressure. Survival. But also, a kind of purpose that makes Jonathan's entire career make sense. Stay with me. Because once you hear what his mother revealed, you'll never listen to his music the same way again. To the world, Jonathan McReynolds has always looked like the perfect gospel success story. He's won major awards, performed on some of the biggest stages in the world, and earned respect from legends like Kirk Franklin and CeCe Winans. His voice is unmistakable, soft yet commanding, filled with emotion and clarity. To fans, he became the symbol of a new kind of gospel, honest, relatable, and soul-deep. But while the spotlight followed his every note, something deeper was always lingering beneath the surface. From the beginning, Jonathan made it clear that he wasn't interested in just entertaining. His lyrics weren't dressed up in sugar-coated sermons, they were real, raw, and sometimes even uncomfortable. Songs like People and Cycles didn't just top gospel charts. They connected. They spoke to listeners who were exhausted by perfection and desperate for truth. In those lyrics, Jonathan wasn't the preacher on stage. He was the broken man in the pew, questioning, struggling, and asking God for answers. But still, fans wondered. How could someone who writes so vulnerably still be hiding so much? Because as open as his music sounded, Jonathan himself was a vault. No scandals. No messy interviews. No oversharing on social media. Just silence when it came to his personal world. People speculated. Some praised his privacy, while others questioned what he was protecting. And now, with one powerful moment, we know the answer. It wasn't just about guarding his image. It was about surviving the weight of what he was carrying. His mother saw that burden every day. And the truth she finally revealed explains why Jonathan's silence wasn't fear, it was pain. But this is only the beginning. Because the pressure he was facing? That's where the real story starts. Long before the Grammy nominations and global tours, Jonathan Caleb McReynolds was just a boy growing up on the south side of Chicago, in a world where music wasn't a luxury, it was therapy. Raised in a single-parent home, Jonathan didn't have a silver spoon, a famous last name, or an industry connection. What he had was a mother. A woman who stood as his rock, his cheerleader, his protector, and, perhaps most importantly, the quiet force behind every note he would one day sing. She wasn't chasing the spotlight for him. She wasn't building a brand. She was building a man. From his earliest days, Jonathan showed signs of a rare gift, not just a good voice, but a conviction in how he used it. His mother saw it. She didn't just nurture his talent, she demanded he remain grounded. While other kids were chasing quick fame, she kept him focused on education and character. She enrolled him at Whitney Young High School, one of Chicago's best, and later at Columbia College, where he formally studied music. This wasn't just about singing for church. She was shaping a well-rounded artist, a thinker, a man of faith with both street wisdom and academic depth. But behind her calm guidance, she was already preparing for the storm. She knew the world didn't treat sensitive, faith-driven young black men with kindness. She knew the same honesty that made Jonathan special would also make him vulnerable. And so, she protected him, not just from the industry, but from the world. She taught him to smile when he was unsure, to walk with grace even when his heart was heavy. And most of all, to sing through the struggle. That's why her recent confession hit so hard. Because if she was breaking her silence, it meant the weight Jonathan carried had become too much to hold in the shadows. She had been the one keeping his truth safe for decades. And now, she was ready to share it, not to expose him, but to finally free him. But before we get to what she said, you need to understand just how much Jonathan never wanted that spotlight in the first place. And how he almost avoided fame entirely. Fame wasn't something Jonathan McReynolds chased. In fact, he ran from it for as long as he could. In an industry that thrives on image, branding, and visibility, Jonathan was the outlier, the quiet storm. He recorded his first project, life music, in his bedroom using basic equipment and raw emotion. No fancy studio. No industry backing. Just honesty, humility, and a homemade sound that would end up shaking the entire gospel world. And that's what made it so powerful. He wasn't trying to be discovered. He was trying to survive. But the music industry noticed him anyway. Life music became an underground sensation. His voice, his message, his vulnerability, they all hit differently. Suddenly, what was once a private outlet became a public platform. Offers rolled in. Gospel legends like Kirk Franklin and Yolanda Adams praised his authenticity. The church welcomed him. The industry embraced him. But Jonathan, he hesitated. Even as he walked red carpets and accepted awards, he was never fully comfortable in the spotlight. Interviews felt awkward. Personal questions were dodged. His Instagram remained carefully curated, spiritual, positive, but never too revealing. And fans noticed. Why was someone so open in song, so guarded in life? Speculation grew. Was he hiding something? Was there a secret? Or was he just protecting himself from the world? Only one person truly knew the answer, his mother. She watched him walk into rooms he didn't ask to be in. She saw the fear in his eyes when fame came knocking louder than his faith felt ready to handle. She knew that while the world cheered for the gospel star, her son was silently bracing for the pressure. And that pressure? It was mounting. Because with every song that touched someone else, Jonathan was losing a little more of himself. The more fans demanded transparency, the more he disappeared behind the scenes. Until finally, the cracks started to show. And as we're about to uncover, what Jonathan was battling behind the music would eventually become the very reason his mother chose to speak out. Behind the awards, behind the glowing press, behind the image of a humble gospel star, Jonathan McReynolds was quietly unraveling. And no one saw it happening, except his mother. Because while the world applauded his strength, he was questioning his worth. From the outside, it looked like Jonathan was living every young artist's dream. He wasn't just successful, he was respected. But behind closed doors, he was carrying something far heavier than anyone realized, the unbearable weight of expectation. The gospel world expected him to be a role model. The church expected him to be spotless. And the industry expected him to be marketable, relatable, safe. But Jonathan? He was just a young man in his 20s, still figuring out who he was, still grappling with questions he couldn't always answer, about faith, identity, and purpose. In interviews, he dropped hints. He spoke about not feeling churchy enough for the gospel community, but not worldly enough for the mainstream. He was caught in the middle, a space where authenticity is often misunderstood, and vulnerability can be seen as weakness. That middle ground became a battlefield. He wasn't just battling the opinions of others. He was battling himself. Every lyric came from a wound. Every performance came with pressure. Because when you're seen as the voice of a generation, there's no room to fail. Jonathan couldn't just release music, he had to live up to it. And that burden? It started to wear him down. His mother saw it in his eyes when he came home from shows. She heard it in his voice during late-night calls. She prayed over him when he couldn't sleep. Because she knew, the world was clapping for a man who was silently breaking. Fans only saw the highlight reel. They didn't see the tears, the doubts, the crushing silence when the music stopped. And for years, his mother kept that pain locked away, out of love, out of protection. But deep down, she knew, silence could only hold the truth for so long. And when it finally broke, it came with a force that nobody was prepared for. Because what Jonathan was going through wasn't just emotional. It was spiritual. It was personal. And as you'll soon hear, it was life-altering. His mother's confession didn't just peel back the curtain. It exposed the storm behind the songs. And the next part of this story? It's the moment everything changed. For years, fans sang along to Jonathan McReynolds' music, uplifted by his melodies and moved by his lyrics. But very few realized they weren't just songs. They were confessions. Every verse, every hook, every quiet pause in his voice carried something heavier than what audiences heard. These weren't polished gospel anthems written in a boardroom. They were survival stories. Take Cycles, for example. At first listen, it sounds like a reflective song about falling into the same spiritual traps. But when you hear it now, knowing what his mother confirmed, it feels like a desperate cry from someone who couldn't break free, no matter how hard he tried. The lyrics weren't metaphorical. They were literal. "Didn't I conquer this last year?" wasn't a rhetorical question. It was real pain. Then there's People, a beautifully honest piece about the exhaustion that comes from trying to meet everyone's expectations. In that song, Jonathan admits what most gospel artists would never dare say, that sometimes, people hurt more than they help. It's bold. It's unfiltered. But most of all, it's true. And then there's Loving Me, a track that always felt like a warm embrace, until now. Re-listen to it with new ears, and it sounds more like a plea, a moment where Jonathan needed to remind himself that he was still loved, even when he didn't feel lovable. Now, with his mother's recent revelation, everything takes on new meaning. She didn't reveal these songs to be creative exercises. She revealed them to be survival notes. Lyrics written not from the mountaintop, but from the valley. Each line came from late nights, private tears, unanswered prayers. From a place of, "I don't know if I can keep doing this." From the quiet rooms where Jonathan wrestled with God, with his calling, with himself. And here's the heartbreaking truth. The same songs that healed us were the very songs that held him together. This changes everything. Because now, when you hear Jonathan sing, you don't just hear talent. You hear trauma. You hear truth. You hear testimony. And that's exactly why his mother spoke out. Because she knew the world saw his gift. But they didn't see what it cost him to give it. But what she said next. That's when the floodgates opened. And it's what left everyone speechless. It wasn't planned. It wasn't part of a press tour or an exclusive interview. It was one of those rare, unfiltered moments that couldn't be scripted, because it came straight from the heart. Jonathan McReynolds' mother, the woman who had protected his silence for decades, finally spoke. And the moment she did, everything changed. It started during a live conversation that quickly went viral. She was soft-spoken at first, hesitant, almost as if she knew the weight of what she was about to say. But as her voice trembled, her words began to carry something undeniable: truth. She said what many had long suspected but could never prove. She revealed that Jonathan had been quietly battling more than creative doubt. More than career pressure. He was carrying emotional weight that, at times, nearly crushed him. There were seasons, she admitted, where he questioned everything: his purpose, his faith, even whether he could continue. There were nights he'd come home from a show and collapse in silence. Days when the expectation to be inspirational left him emotionally drained. And moments when he stood in front of thousands, smiling, but dying on the inside. She didn't mention labels. She didn't dramatize the details. But what she did say left the gospel world reeling. People see the gift, she said, but they don't always see the pain that created it. That sentence hit like a lightning strike. Suddenly, fans saw it all differently. The humble interviews. The cryptic social media posts. The lyrics that sounded too personal to be fiction. And for the first time, everything aligned. Jonathan wasn't hiding because he was ashamed. He was hiding because he was hurting. The confession wasn't about creating buzz.